This is John Gilroy from the Federal Tech Podcast.
This is Brian Baney from Aeyon.
Today we're going to talk about robotic process automation. Hit the music, Manny.
Welcome to the Federal Tech Podcast, where industry leaders share insights on innovation with a focus on reducing cost and improving security for federal technology. If you like the Federal Tech Podcast, please support us by giving us a rating and review on Apple Podcasts.
Welcome to the Federal Tech Podcast. My name is John Gilroy, and I will be your moderator. Our guest today is Brian Baney, Vice President, Corporate Development and Defense Agency Growth at a company called Aeyon, A-E-Y-O-N, and we will be diving into robotic process automation in a few moments. But first, I would be remiss if I didn't say where we're recording this. We're recording this in Monk's Barbecue in lovely downtown Purcellville, Virginia. So, Brian, after this interview, you'll be enjoying some food. What are you going to jump in on?
So I went to school in North Carolina.
Oh.
Thus, I am a little biased towards the pulled pork. But I heard a rumor that the burnt ends were the way to go. So if they allow for the combo, I might have to try some burnt ends, definitely some pulled pork. You can't go wrong with brisket.
This is a very casual place here. You can do what you want. It's so casual, it's got a Christmas tree made out of empty whiskey bottles, so it's pretty flexible here.
I've heard the tab is open, so maybe we can try everything on the menu, but we'll have to see.
Okay. Well, there are a lot of people listening, and they hear the name of the company, Aeyon, and you can go to their website, aeyon.us, but perhaps you can give us maybe a thumbnail explanation of how the company kind of came together.
Sure. So if you were to talk to almost any Aeyon employee 18 months ago, we would have been part of 4 separate companies. So Aeyon originally started as Artland Consulting. We were a woman-owned small business founded in 2011. It was acquired by our current CEO, Sunny Singh, in 2018, and he really wanted to grow the company into a pure high-end services firm that kind of competed in the mid-tier. In 2020, we took an investment from Enlightenment Capital, and that really set the foundation for growth. And then we made a number of acquisitions in the subsequent year and a half. So we acquired Selke Consulting in 2021. We branded to Aeyon. And then in the spring, or actually late winter of 2022, we acquired MTS out of Huntsville, and then Merrick, which is a small firm out of Maryland. So when you kind of look end to end what those companies did, Artland was very strong in OSD, growing footprint in the Army, a lot of data, and using data to empower our customers to get insights into their programs, their processes, their organizations. Selke had a very strong financial management background with a growing capability in robotic process automation, or RPA. MTS out of Huntsville, their focus was on NASA, so that got us into the civilian footprint. And they did a lot in engineering, data science, research development, and those kind of things. Merrick's a little bit more of a niche firm, software as a service type of work that focuses really on e-learning, training, and those kind of concepts. So end to end, Aeon's really positioned themselves to focus on those big government processes that you see a lot of the challenges that our customers have. So think acquisition, think business and financial management, operations, engineering, logistics, right? Those are those core processes that you see at a lot of agencies, especially in DoD and in NASA, and those make excellent candidates for digital transformation, especially around data analytics and RPA.
Mr. Singh, what was his first name again?
Sunny?
Sunny Singh. I think what he's doing, he's acting like LeBron James. He's putting together a dream team. He went this forward, this center, he went this guy and this guard, and put together the best players in order to really serve the government better. And I went to your website, and I saw the different focuses you have, very, very strong. It is a dream team of people who are very, very good in particular areas, but all together, all 4, what is this, 1 + 1 + 1 equals 6 or something. Put them all together, they're more dynamic together, aren't they?
I think so. And it's about really positioning ourselves to now compete against the larger firms that have big names in this industry. Aeyon is a new name, right? And we've taken a number of steps over the year to really get our name out there, show the value that we can provide as the client. I think when you look at some of the success that we've had over the year, it's been able we've been successful because we've been able to take elements from each of the 4 companies and put them together to devise solutions, develop new capabilities for our clients, especially around data analytics, especially around RPA, that have been very helpful to address some of their challenges.
I want to dive into RPA in a little bit, but I want to get to a silly story. I specialize in silly stories. So my wife is a assistant principal at this little school, and the person who's doing the payroll couldn't do the payroll on the weekend. And she went in on Sunday and she did the payroll because guess what? Those teachers want to get their paychecks. I mean, she would have some unhappy teachers if they didn't get their paychecks.
Christmas paycheck.
Yeah. The morale would be terrible. Okay, so let's take that and apply that to a young man in Alaska who's working for the Air Force and has 2 kids, and they want their paycheck. I mean, so we can talk about robotic process automation and how smart these people are and about OST and everything else, but the bottom line is that you got to make your customer happy, and the customer may be an airman in a remote part of Alaska who needs that check, and then robotic process automation can enable that, can't it?
Absolutely. And, you make up a good term with customer. Right? At the end of the day, yes, maybe we are implementing RPA with a specific agency, but really the customer is much broader than that. You talk about the airman, the war fighter. I mean, millions potentially of people that might be impacted by some of the transactions that RPA can essentially automate. So payroll, financial, logistics, a lot of those processes that have some low-impact work that you can automate, those are ripe candidates for automation.
If you are listening to this and you're about to go down to see a baseball game downtown, it's 100 degrees outside, and you want to review something, there is an article at aeyon.us, and it's written by a guy named Mark Hoganmiller. It's a fantastic article. I mean, it summarizes so many things here, doesn't it? I mean, this guy is really smart. He talks about low-code approach. He talks about data scientists and adding value, and he talks about morale. I mean, it's nice to be technical, but that's really what it's all about, isn't it? The customer or the end user. And so I go back and read this article again because it summarizes so many of the concerns people have with this automation.
Yes, morale is boosted when the individual gets their paycheck, but I think morale is also boosted when things like automation just allow people to do their jobs. When you can automate some of the low-impact work that allows maybe an analyst to spend his or her time actually doing the analysis that he or she needs to do for their job, I think that's where you see the positive impact, and I think that's where it boosts morale. We had a situation down at the Army where they were doing some status of funds reporting, and an individual had to go into a number of databases to pull data, and it took them hours, right? And there was 3 different analysts. I would say it probably took them a day and a half collectively just to do this report. So they would only do it once a month just because of them pulling the data was just so tedious. Well, through automation, we were able to reduce that to 2 minutes, and they can now do these reporting daily. And it could actually allow them to be the analyst that they needed to be, where they could improve their forecasting, improve their reporting to leadership, improve the briefing that they needed to pull together, whether it was to bigger Army or someone in the organization. They could actually do their job. And I think that's pretty important from a morale perspective, that you're focused on the high-value work by automating the low-value work. Mm-hmm.
Well, we're here in a barbecue place in a little town in Virginia, and I'm sure that if I invited 50 CIOs from the federal government out here on a Saturday, we had some barbecue and sitting outside and talking and everything else, I'm sure if I listened to the conversation, I would hear words like zero trust, machine learning, and robotic process automation. And so maybe for the sake of our listeners, you can define robotic process automation, and we'll talk about how it's applied.
Yeah, I mean, I think... So I was thinking about this question actually before we got here. One thing I find so fascinating about the time that we're in is that when you look at some of the words that you just mentioned, zero trust, machine learning, robotic process automation, right? You go to any of the thought leaders on this, they almost seem to have different definitions on it. I think that shows just maybe how new some of this is, and I think it just shows how exciting this industry can be. I think there's a lot that we're learning when it comes to some of these technologies. I mean, RPA is still a relatively small market, although I think it's an area for growth. But when I look at robotic process automation, to me, it's automating the low impact to focus on the high impact. And I know I've said that already, but it's taking the mundane, repetitive processes that employees are forced to do as part of their day-to-day job, taking that out of the equation, so that they can use their time and their skill sets to focus on the things that are more relevant to driving, I think, improvements, to driving more efficiency within the organization.
So, Brian, let's say a agency listens to this interview, and then they go to Federal News Network and they see your logo there, and they go to an event and they see maybe your booth there or something and walk up to you. So what's the first step? I mean, they call you up and you come out and talk with them. I mean, where do they start even looking at RPA?
So good question. I don't know that it's that much different than some of the challenges you see today when it comes to anything technical, right? Whether it's data analytics, whether it's software implementation, systems implementation, things dealing with data. A lot of our customers, the first thing they want to know is results, right? Benefits. What are they going to get out of what I'm going to pay for? That's pretty important, and they always look for use cases and various case studies and various successes that I think we've been able to show with some of our customers to prove that I think they're making the right decision. The challenge with RPA, unlike things like business intelligence or data analytics, it's not necessarily visual. I can go into a customer, I can show a dashboard, I can show business intelligence capabilities, and you can wow them on the spot with nice graphics. You can show them designs. You can show them how their data is being manipulated into a visual. RPA is very, very difficult to do. There's a very big educational process that we've had to have with a lot of our clients, explaining what the process is, explaining what the benefits are going to be, and showing them typically through some examples to show what the real benefits are. The beauty of RPA is that because it's kind of a low-code, no-code solution, you can build some of these robots pretty quickly and show the benefits to a customer pretty quickly. So prototyping is not so much of a challenge. You can do it and show the benefits to the customer, and then you want to make them the believers, right? Once they become your advocate, you hope to have that avalanche effect, right? Build a robot, show some success, build on top of that robot, have more success, continue to build efficiencies, build more customers within your customer, and that's kind of what you hope to see. But I will say the number one challenge that we have with all of this is that educational piece that you were just asking about. And so it's persistence, it's being able to show them some prototypes, because it's very tough to visualize until one of the analysts shows how their process has been automated. And then they see themselves the time benefit that they can get through that automation.
From a human perspective, if my agency is looking at robotic process automation, I mean, you may have this emotional robot, take my job, I'm scared. So is this a fear that people have? That things going to be, or do they say, well, finally, I don't have to do the drudgery, I can concentrate on the important stuff? I mean, what's the typical reaction?
It's the latter. I think that fear always exists with people. Anytime you talk digital transformation or anytime you talk about introducing technology to display information, share data, do a report, any of those things, I think analysts tend to have that fear that, hey, are they actually coming for the work that I'm supposed to do day in and day out? The answer here is no. What we're trying to do is have you focus on the analysis that you're actually supposed to be doing, whether you're an acquisition analyst, a procurement analyst, logistics analyst, financial analyst. But most of your day is filled with tedious tasks of putting data into a spreadsheet, putting data into a report, pulling data from various systems. We can automate all that. And that can be done for you so that when you're asked for data calls, when you're asked to do analysis, when you're asked to build reports, you can now spend your time on that and highlight your expertise as the analyst so that you're briefing your leadership on the right thing. So once they see that, I think that's that aha moment where they realize, yeah, they're not coming for my role. They're trying to basically support my role. I think a good way to describe it really is, you're bringing capacity and you're bringing expertise to that person without scaling manpower, and you're basically allowing that person to be the analyst that they're hired to be without having to do the various tedious things that they don't want to do as part of their job.
When you start introducing bots into an environment, this adds complexity, doesn't it?
Always does. Always does. Especially like any technology, there's always challenges that you need to consider. One thing that's interesting about RPA is that it also needs to access systems like humans do. So when you think about things from a security perspective, and you're beginning to see this now, especially in government, on how to account for robots and RPA and being able to access other systems, these are all the kind of things that you need to account for. Like any kind of software, you want to make sure that you have some governance, that it's not getting out of control. You want to make sure that you're making the right investments. A lot of this you're now beginning to see a lot of this come out from the government in terms of direction, recommendation, policies to help avoid some of these challenges.
Aeyon.us. I went there, and there's a press release. 200 new hires? I mean, what's going on with you guys? I mean, how can you keep track of that?
Yeah, so we just had a very big win down at NASA. It was through our JV, Technologies. Very large contracts, really highlighting the financial capabilities that we have. But another good example of a program that is ripe for what we push, and that's digital transformation. There's always a need to have more data. There's always a need to analyze data, business intelligence, always a need to improve and automate processes. And so, we hope that we can use this new win, which is a huge win for us, the largest that we've had as an organization, to be able to advance some of our digital transformation capabilities.
Well, it sounds like Sonny's strategy won the basketball game.
It's still going, and
it's still continuing.
It's still going.
Yeah.
I mean, I think the NASA win was a great indication of what he did, bringing the companies together and highlighting the various strengths. Right. In that particular case, you highlighted the strengths of 3 different companies in that bid, and so. The recipe for success, I think, continues, and we're continuing to grow and very excited about the future.
Let's go back to Mark Hogan-Miller's article. He talks about one of the main benefits of robotic process automation is reducing errors. And he says, look, it can reduce errors for paychecks, it can reduce errors for getting parts, and imagine at NASA it could be a whole wide range of things that reduces errors. And if there's any place that needs error reduction, it's going to be NASA, I would think.
Yeah, and that's the great thing about automation. And I go back to the examples of some of the analysts that are building their own reports and pulling data from various systems. Every time there's that transaction, there's an opportunity for an error. We did a similar robot down at the Marine Corps where basically they were comparing transactions in a logistics system to those in a financial system. And they were able to accurately compare over 100,000 transactions to make sure that the data was accurate. Very, very tough to do with an individual, but a robot could do it very quickly. So I think the benefits that you see in error reduction is one of the prime benefits that you get from RPA.
This is Mike Beckley from Aeyon. Listen to episode 53 of Federal Tech Podcast to learn how process automation can help the federal government with compliance and cybersecurity.
I just wrote down 3 words: waste, fraud, and abuse. I mean, that's what's needed in waste, fraud, and abuse, comparing systems effectively in mundane tasks. And there's a lot of money being lost in the civilian sector in this area. And so maybe that's the application of comparing data sets to see where the weaknesses, where the errors are.
And the system is a little bit open towards waste, fraud, and abuse when you have data scattered across various systems. But now when you have the technology that can pull this data, aggregate this data, and perform some reporting, it helps minimize some of the errors in transaction, or in this particular case, fraudulent or malintent.
Brian, I've been doing this for many years. I remember back 25 years ago, I talked about Pentium processors and 46 and 386 and all kinds of things, and a lot of things were new. And after a while, standards got developed. And then we had wireless networks, 802.11, then standards got to develop. There's standards now for zero trust. Are there any standards in the work here for robotic process automation?
So the federal government is beginning to pay attention to this, especially as it gets some momentum. And GSA now has an RPA community of practice. I think it's a good reference to go to. You can find it on the GSA website, or you can go to digital.gov, which has a bunch of communities related to IT, but one of them being RPA. And in that, they have a guidebook that talks about practices and processes and potential policies to make sure that agencies are implementing RPA correctly. They are able to, I think, bust some myths that they have about RPA, which I think is pretty relevant. So you go back to that customer apprehension and being able to break into various customers and kind of get their buy-in into RPA. There's a number of myths that I think that GSA dispels. And of course, just with the community of practice, right, that should only continue to grow and promote RPA across the federal government. From a security standpoint, you're also beginning to see some standards as well. So I think there's an effort now to not standardize, but I think implement best practices and approaches for agencies that are willing to pursue RPA to help them make sure that they implement it appropriately.
I have a friend of mine who owns a company in the aerospace industry, and he works on a lot of standards and compliance for wiring harnesses. And he tells me that standards are like toothbrushes. Everyone wants to use their own. No one wants to use anyone else's standard. They want to comply with that. So I think we're just in the incipient stages here. And I would imagine the next 5 to 7 years, it's going to be a point where there's actually maybe the community of practice will come up with some best practices and also some standards, because it really has to be some kind of a commonality between systems because it's just so complex.
I think so. And this will all continue to evolve. And like any technology, it will only improve. The challenge that I think you see is everyone's needs are different. All the use cases are different. And so you want to be able to provide agencies the flexibility to use RPA to address their problems while still accounting for the important things that can help control RPA implementation, such as governance, security, and the other necessary controls to make sure that they're implemented appropriately. So I'm convinced, and I think GSA does this very well, especially when they look at it from a government-wide perspective, that they can come to a good list of standards or recommendations to ensure that any RPA program, regardless of size, because it's very scalable, is implemented appropriately across the various federal agencies.
Way before you were born, I suspect, there was a movie released called 2001: A Space Odyssey. And what we learned there was that sometimes robots aren't always nice. They can do bad things. And there's a negative side to robotic automation too. I'm sure people look at it and go, well, it's not as flexible, and it's very complex, and it just will just magnify whatever problems are there. I mean, you can hear the objections coming. So is that objections? No, Brian, you understand. It's just whatever's there is going to make it worse.
I'm going to pivot away from RPA right now. Look what you're seeing now. What's been all over the media, especially with ChatGPT. If you go onto social media, if you go onto Twitter, it is just filled with posts and opinions about AI and ChatGPT and some of this technology. There's always going to be naysayers. There's always going to be promoters. But I think people need to certainly overlook, there's always challenges, right? And that's why you have a lot of smart people working on this to address those challenges. I think you need to look at the long-term benefits from a lot of this and focus on what those benefits can be and try to get to those outcomes. Certainly with RPA and robots, there's going to be similar challenges. Thankfully, it's not as challenging as like machine learning or AI or some of the other things that you have. But there are going to be challenges. And I mentioned earlier, you talk about governance and making sure that agencies are implementing RPA correctly. It's software. So if you develop it poorly, you're going to get a bad robot. And so it's like data. What's the old saying? Bad data in, bad data out. It's kind of the same thing. Bad robot, you're not going to get, I think, the process executed and automated just like you wanted to. And so there are a number of challenges. And we're always working to address those challenges. And so I have no doubt that the benefits from all of this will far outweigh some of the costs of these challenges.
Earlier in the interview, I facetiously referred to a bunch of CIOs in a barbecue place and listening to their conversation. They talk about zero trust. I would imagine that RPA would be an enabler of zero trust. I mean, it would allow an agency to use zero trust because just it would speed up processes, wouldn't it? It could be a tool for zero trust.
When you look at all this technology, you can't look at it in a vacuum, right? I mean, RPA relies on data, security relies on data, AI relies on data, and RPA is the foundation for some of that. And so I think a lot of this technology can enable the other technology. It's just making sure you find out the right points of enablement and making sure they work together.
Yeah, it looks like, just from a technological view, with the proliferation of data, proliferation of hybrid systems, I mean, the only way that we're going to accomplish this task in the next 5 years is to automate something, because it's a perfect storm. There's a lack of talent out there. People can't hire IT people. There's this drastic increase in the amount of petabytes of data coming in. And oh, by the way, people working remotely, the complexity just gets to be overwhelming. It has to be automated somehow, doesn't it?
Absolutely. And when you look at government is a very policy, process, and procedure-driven entity. Every department, every agency, they're driven by a set of rules and policies on how they're supposed to execute their mission. Within all of that, there's a number of systems, there's a ton of data that all needs to be collected and analyzed to essentially execute their mission. RPA has a big role in all of that. And what I like about RPA is that it can get down to the analyst level, right? It's non-invasive. It doesn't require you to change a lot of your process. You can layer over your process to get access to the systems and the data that you need, and then you can scale from there. So I think it's an excellent tool that accounts for the growing use of data, the growing use of systems in our government, and really allows folks to work within those policies and their processes to do their job.
Yeah, make their job more efficient while using less resources, and focus on the high-value activities like analysis. Good. Well, we're running out of time here, unfortunately. You've been listening to the Federal Tech Podcast with John Gilroy. I'd like to thank my guest, Brian Baney, Vice President, Corporate Development and Defense Agency Growth at Aeyon.
Thanks for listening to the Federal Tech Podcast. If you like the Federal Tech Podcast, please support us by giving us a rating and review on Apple Podcast.